Aladdin has to be one of my all-time favorite Disney movies and is no stranger to this channel. A while back I took a look at the PlayStation 1 title Aladdin and Nazir's Revenge. While only one of 3 Aladdin games ever released on a console, Nazir's Revenge was the only one with an original story and was actually the final Aladdin game ever developed. I know that we are kind of working backwards here, but let's go to the beginning when the animated film that all this was based on was released. As we all know, the Aladdin film was incredibly successful, warranting 2 direct-to-video sequels and an animated series. Per usual for this time, every movie was getting a video game tie-in, and Aladdin was no exception. Actually, the Aladdin game for the Sega Genesis, developed by Virgin Games, is considered to be the all-time best Disney game along with The Lion King. But this Aladdin game isn't what we're talking about. I want to talk about the seemingly ignored and apparently inferior Super Nintendo port from Capcom. This version of the game wasn't a flop by any means, as it sold around 1.8 million copies, making it the highest selling Super Nintendo game behind all however many versions of Street Fighter II were out. Yeah, that might be about 2 million less sales than its Genesis counterpart, but that's besides the point. Today is the day we step on some retro toes. Not really. Aladdin on the Genesis may have had the better graphics, music, sound quality, and animations, but the Super Nintendo version is, in my opinion, the better video game. Don't worry, that's as far as this pissing contest goes. Both games are good in their own rights, I guess. But I just personally feel that my favorite game of the two hasn't gotten anywhere near the amount of love that it should be as a well-aged platformer in the current day. Instead of an HD re-release, this game got an uber dog shit Game Boy Advance port. I can't be bitter though, because, right? The Genesis version did sell over double the amount of copies, and the SNES port's head man in charge, a not yet peaked Shinji Mikami, yes, that Shinji Mikami, even said that if he had not made the Super Nintendo version of the game, he would probably buy the Genesis one because it has a sword and better animation. Can't quite argue with that, can we? Whatever, we're still taking a look at Aladdin for the Super Nintendo. First up is the story. We get a couple little cutscenes before the title screen that are pretty much the SparkNotes version of the film's introduction with Jafar in the desert. That might be the most in-depth that the game gets narratively. We get some short little info cards as progress is made, and the ending has about as much detail as the intro, but the story is followed pretty loosely. Aladdin still makes his way through the streets and rooftops of Agrabah into the Cave of Wonders, goes on the carpet ride with Jasmine, accompanied by an excellent version of A Whole New World. And finishes up in the Agrabah Palace in a battle with a weird sound-making Jafar who is made of balls. There are a couple of things added in though, like these levels that take place in a sort of world created by a genie, and some areas inside of a sandy-ass pyramid of all places. Despite not looking as good as its Genesis counterpart, Aladdin on the Super Nintendo is a very detailed and super colorful game. This is especially apparent when playing through the genie levels. The Cave of Wonder levels are also pretty impressive with its well-textured water, lava, and rocky surfaces. The genie levels though, this had to be where the devs had the most fun working on the game. It's so full of just life. There are tons of genie-themed platforms ranging from retracting tongues, head balloons, and blocks that have funny facial expressions, and these big hands and arm platforms. Not to mention that these levels also use the best track from the film, Friend Like Me, to make the stage the most memorable one, along with it having the most fun and fast-paced platforming segments in the entire game. These levels alone really do show the best that this game has to offer in the gameplay department too. In the film, Aladdin is like a nimble parkour master, and I feel that it is captured correctly in this game. If you miss a jump, it typically isn't game over, as Aladdin is able to grab onto most ledges. If there's anything on the ground that can be jumped on, be it a pole or enemy, or in some cases a big ass spike, Aladdin will use it to handspring himself into the air, with the height of this being determined by how long the jump button has been held for. You may need to launch Aladdin up to a ledge or two, in this case something to swing on, and this type of thing really makes the game feel much more fluid. When you have the sheet parachute or whatever it is, this fluidity is enhanced, and after a few minutes of getting used to floating after jumps and landing on top of an enemy's head or an item pot, you'll begin to quickly swing and bounce through every level, becoming faster as you go. This sort of shows a flaw in the game's design though. I mean, once you're good at the game, each level is over in what feels like a minute. And actually, it might be a minute, because these levels are really short. Like, really short. There are 18 levels divided into 7 stages, with only stages 1, 6, and 7 having a boss fight. And stage 6's boss is just a boo and a fucking Egyptian death mask that you jump on one time. So there's really just 2 boss fights. If you're good at platforming, bosses and enemies alike will be gone just as quick as the levels they're in. The only way to do damage to enemies is by jumping on their heads, sometimes preceded by throwing an apple at them from your finite but easily replenished supply of the fruit to cause a stun effect. The tiny enemies like these bats, sand bats, and Iago can be easily taken out by a well-placed apple throw. So this mechanic isn't totally useless, but either way, everything can be taken out by a good old run and jump onto the dome. And to me, this acts as a way to add to the flow of a level. You're typically never going to just stop and fuck around with any enemies, and you're just going to use them as a platform to help you speed through a level. I really like how this feels, and I feel encouraged to keep playing so that I can find a faster way to get through the game. There isn't really anything frustrating about playing it except for when Aladdin gets a little slippery sometimes, but unless he falls into a pit or water, Aladdin will just take a heart of damage and bounce back up after touching spikes or fucking lava of all things. I don't think I've ever even played a game that didn't insta-kill you for touching spikes. So I guess this one is unique in that aspect. I wouldn't mind the challenge from that being here though, since the game has always felt kinda easy to me even when I played it as a kid. There are a few other things to do in this game like collect these gems. Collecting all of the red ones in a stage doesn't do much besides add to your score. And for every 100 green gems that you collect, Aladdin gets another heart added to his health pool. He can also add hearts by finding certain chests in a couple of levels that contain these big red orbs. Of course, there are extra life pickups spread throughout the game, and most importantly, there are chests that have these golden scarabs that start flying around in an easy to recognize circular pattern for a few seconds. If it is collected, you get to spin the bonus genie wheel after completing that stage you found the scarab in. You can win extra lives, a health upgrade, or more continues. There's one thing I want to mention. It's hardly worth mentioning because it's just, to my disappointment, hardly in the game. Where in the goddamn are more magic carpet levels? There was only one actual carpet level involving challenge during the escape from the Cave of Wonders. Every single time that I ever play this level is so much fun. Yeah, it's short as shit, but I love it and it reminds me of the hard-ass turbo tunnel level from Battletoads. I would have taken another level like this in any form. It could even be a damn reskin with a sand wave chasing after you or whatever in the pyramid levels. But I suppose I can just restart the game whenever I want and be back to that part in like 20 minutes, so fuck it. Talking about this game really makes me want to play through it like 10 more times. I've tried my best to not sound biased or anything, but I can't really find much wrong with this game aside from the shortness, lack of carpet levels, and occasional slipperiness. Aladdin is a must-play for anyone looking to get their hands on an outstanding platformer, along with one of the best and best-looking games to ever be released on the Super Nintendo. Whenever we see each other again, it'll be under very similar circumstances to this video. This title is another Capcom platforming game that is much higher up on the list of Super Nintendo greats than Aladdin is and was actually released a month later. It's a bit more futuristic than Aladdin though, specifically taking place in 21XX. 100 years after its original incarnation of games. Next up, we'll be taking a good look at Mega Man X.